So if you're listening to this, you know this is not Jonathan Gates. And if you're watching this, you definitely know this is not Jonathan Gates. But this is the OTC podcast, PODTC. Welcome to PODTC. Today, I am joined by the OG podcaster of PODTC, Jonathan Gates. Welcome, Jonathan.
Hi, Melissa. Happy to be here.
Yes. And just for those who might be listening for the first time, why don't you introduce yourself?
So my name is Jonathan. I have been with OTC since 2018, but I am the original host of this podcast. We started it, I think we're going to get into it, but we started it a couple of years ago. And I recorded 20-some episodes before we got here today, and I am very happy to be handing it off to my colleague, obviously here, Melissa.
Yeah. So what motivated you to do PODTC? Like, come up with the idea, the name, just why did you want to get it started?
Sure. So I think I was around 30 years old, just listened to a lot of podcasts. And throughout the pandemic and such, OTC, we had to kind of switch from the in-person professional development. You were on the board at that time. We were really webinar heavy, virtual conference in 2021, all of that. And it kind of got to the point where when people were returning to the office and kind of getting back into those really busy in-person events and schedules, that we had a harder time coordinating a bunch of people to come, for one, to present on a certain topic, but then also a bunch of people to watch at the same time. So we've always recorded webinars and posted them on the YouTube channel and things. So it wasn't necessarily that, these messages, the professional development, whatever, wasn't getting to people that wanted to watch it, but we thought, what would be an easier way to not scale it down per se, but make it more easily watchable from, the perspective of our members. So I thought to myself, maybe just recording these one-off conversations, sometimes it was with two people, but something that we could record, have a good discussion about a certain topic and about the people, and then post that on the YouTube channel just for anyone to watch at any time. And when I said that, I should learn from work. When you have an idea, usually that's signing yourself up for work. So for the last few years, I was the host, the scheduler, the producer, all of the things for PODTC. It was really fun throughout the years, and kind of as I am, I'm sure we'll get
transitioning
into,
it.
we're gonna transition this to you. And as I kind of am in my last, little bit on the board and such, just giving it a new life and getting it away from my boring voice.
Yeah. So you see our podcast studio and all this setup that we're doing.
Super nice.
Thinking back to when you started, like what kind of were you thinking when you were like, I'm just gonna jump right in? Like, what would you say you've learned about doing podcast over that period of time through all those episodes?
Yeah, so I never had. This is awesome. This is a lot of cool tech, and this will be edited well, and I'm sure will sound much better than my headset in Zoom. However, especially when we're talking about a statewide organization, obviously I talk to, I've worked in the Northeast Ohio area, but I've talked to people from all over the state about random topics. And it's very hard to coordinate, obviously, getting in person for these things. OTC, we're a pretty lean organization, so it's not like we've got all this cash laying around just to order a bunch of expensive microphones and things like that, which is why this is awesome here at Tri-C. However, we were using Zoom for the webinar, so that kind of just was the natural progression. And we hadn't done a webinar in a little bit by the time that we started PODTC. So it was a very natural progression to just say, hey, do you want to come on here? I think the very first episode was you, Mary Witt, and I, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was thinking that the very first one was the president stream for our Ohio Transfer Council. So it was you, Mary Witt, and I. And we went on and on and on, didn't we? For like 45 minutes to an hour.
I like to call those good conversations.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. That was before we knew what we were doing, right? Yeah. We just went on and on and on. And you sent me all the questions and we answered them. And how many times was I a guest? Maybe that's why I ended up being host.
Well, that is funny. I think you were definitely the first, second guest, and then third guest. Especially with you were the head planner for the last two conferences. So what we do every single year is bring on whoever is chairing that, and just to go through everything that the conference is going to be that year, or at least what we know up to that point, usually about like a month and a half before the conference. And I didn't really for other topics and stuff, I never really brought guests back, but just, you were, I think, past president during that very first episode. And then you were, I'd like to say, queen of the conference the last, couple of years. So I don't know if I ever had any other repeat guests. So I think really you're just royalty at this point.
Whoever I have on 3 times automatically gets to be the host.
Yeah. Whenever you're ready, just have them on again until,
I'll remember that. So as your time as a host, what were some of your favorite episodes? Or your most interesting topics?
Yeah, I just, some of it was kind of hard because you're not only trying to think of people, but you're also trying to think of topics. And it usually just kind of turned into your colleagues or, friends from around the state at other institutions. And some of it, I remember I think it was episode 4 was with Rachel Fulton, who's my buddy from Southeast Ohio. And I was like, do you want to be on the podcast? Because we're just buddies. And she's like, yeah, what would it be about? And I just asked, what do you want to talk about? Thinking that she was over partnerships and stuff at Wright State. It was right before she went to UC. And she said, I really want to talk about duties as assigned. And I'm just thinking I don't think anyone's really, that's not a webinar topic for sure.
Yeah.
But that sounds like a fun conversation to have over a podcast episode. So some of it was about degree pathways. Some of it was about really niche professional area. I remember last fall I did one with my supervisor at the time, Ted. It was about horizontal transfer students, which is usually not the body of there's not a ton of research and everything about it. It was a lot of perception, obviously, but it was just a really interesting conversation that we don't really get to touch on too much. So I had a lot of just really random niche conversations like that it really opened my eyes over the years. I know, we've gotten to do some from people from ODHE, and just, I remember Jared did a Veterans Day special, I think I called it, which is super cheesy and corny, but just a population that kind of just needs a little bit more highlight and stuff. So that's really tough, I guess, to pick a 1 or 2 that I really liked, but it was really cool getting to talk to more in depth with people from around the state, get to know more of their background. And, if you've been in the OTC community, you've heard me talk so much over the last few years, and that's fine. I have a huge mouth. I will talk all day. However, I would really, it was nice to use the platform to then highlight, one of my first questions every single podcast was, tell me about yourself, explain the professional journey, right? Or personal, or, whatever the person would like to share. And, there were people that I had known for years. They would, lay that out. I remember when you did, I'm like, wait, you're the director of, athletics? Or it was something super random. And I'm like, I've known Melissa for 5 years. I never knew that. So that's just one funny example. But that was 20 some people, so. Yeah, it's tough, but I enjoyed a lot of them.
So why don't you share, what is your professional transfer journey? Because I don't know if that was anything you actually shared with the audience.
I never shared because, I wanted to highlight other people.
Yeah, so let's take this time to highlight what your journey has been. I'll try to be a little
brief, but if you are watching, you can see where I currently work. I wore my big Tri-C crew neck today. Cole from UC didn't know that I made the switch back in March, so he was very surprised to see me today in a Tri-C. UNC shirt and not a Kent State shirt. So I was just kind of, I did a grad school program at the University of Akron where I was a GA in advising and then in admissions. So kind of when I was graduating and landing a job there in the admissions office, my director at the time said, you have that advising background and that admissions background. Transfer admissions makes a lot of sense here. I think that you would be good for that. And I just had kind of thought, like, I had friends that were transfer students. She's my wife now, I guess, girlfriend at the time. Weird thing to say at this point. We've been married like 8 years. But she was a transfer student. So like I had been around, but I wasn't one myself. However, it was a really fun, like, again, what we do is niche. So, it was this really interesting population that I got to work with. And over the years, I worked full-time at Akron for about 3 years, did a ton of traveling, started actually on the OTC executive board back in 2018 while I was at Akron. But professionally, I made the jump to Kent State and worked there for just under 5 years. Until recently. I was assistant director of admissions when I left. I was helping with transfer recruitment there as well. And during that time, had gotten, I got the webinar series off the ground at OTC and helped with that for years. Did PODTC, have helped plan a lot of conferences, gotten to present at, I don't know how many OTC conferences. I feel like we all have quite a bit. But I've gotten to, during that time, I got to present at national conferences a handful of times. So super grateful for that. Got to publish with ACRO and just have done a lot. I'm back in school working on my EdD now because I'm crazy, I guess. And
I agree.
Yeah. And then eventually, so March 31st was my first day at Tri-C. So I'm now a program manager at Tri-C in the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences. So I'm not a transfer specialist, as I'm sure many of you have talked to here at Tri-C or seen around, or, quote unquote, Melissa's office, as I will just call it. But I am still working with transfer students, just in a much different capacity, much heavier on the retention side, and maybe not doing a lot of the groundwork that Melissa's team does, but certainly still cohort building and all of that within the school, which is largely AA and AS students. So that's kind of why I'm here.
Well, thanks. And, I thank you for trusting me to take over PODTC.
I can't think of a better person.
Continue your legacy with PODTC. So maybe just to finish us off today, can you share maybe what you hope for the future of PODTC and maybe one or two tips you would give me on being host?
Well, you and I talk all the time, so I'm sure you'll ask me if you need any help with, I don't know how good my advice is, but I think the favorite parts that I've had with conversing with new voices and getting that out to our membership, I think that's always been the mission, and I feel like you're going to do just that. I know that you have some creative ideas. I'm not going to spoil anything, but on the conversations and things that you want to have on this podcast with interesting people. So I feel like that's always the goal of a podcast, any of them that you listen to, where it's just like the conversation is good. So you hopefully as this continues and, you do what you want to do. I'm actually super excited too. I am definitely not the person that would I understand this is like a project I started, in a couple of ways. I love getting to hand something off and seeing how it becomes something new. So that's kind of like the webinars, I haven't done those in a couple of years. PODTC, same thing. I'm excited to see it with new life. I know I made a joke at one of our executive board meetings not too long ago, but since 2018, this is the first time that someone on the executive board has been younger than me. So we have two, Vince Lombardi from Franklin and Gina from Miami, where it was just kind of nice, not to say that young people are the only ones that can, obviously that's not true. A lot of young people have been on the board over the years. But it was just funny because I'm like, this has literally been the first time, and I kind of wasn't even supposed to be here this year. So It wasn't going to happen even, but it's just new ideas, new breath into kind of the things that have existed and people have become accustomed to over the years and such. So I guess my advice is just if you have on interesting people, you're going to be interested. You're going to ask good questions. You're going to be really engaged in the conversation. I feel like people can really feel that when they're listening, and it kind of provokes you to ask better follow-up questions and stuff. So kind of like what we tell students when they're picking classes and such, like if you pick classes that you're more interested in, you're probably going to do better. If you think about that with podcasting, it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah. And I think with, at least for us in Ohio, with NISTS, closing out their tenure, and we're always looking for professional development opportunities. Hopefully, PODTC, we can provide that as an additional opportunity, not even just in Ohio, but hopefully, for others across the nation. So
Ohio is awesome when it comes to transfer. So we need to keep continuing to highlight all the great things that are happening in our state.
Great. Well, thank you for being with me today and being my first guest on PODTC.
Yeah, it was a great time. Thanks for having me.